Sara Gilbert's story does not begin with fame, applause, or television history. It begins quietly in a family already touched by the entertainment world, where talent was present but expectations were heavy. Born Sarah Rebecca Abeles on January 29, 1975, she was surrounded by people who understood Hollywood's opportunities and its dangers. Her grandparents had worked in television, and her older siblings were already involved in acting. From an early age, Sarah observed success up close, but she also witnessed the cost of chasing it. Unlike many child stars who fall into acting accidentally, Sarah was intentional. She wanted to act, but more than that, she wanted to understand it. She was curious, observant, and deeply introspective, traits that would later define both her performances and her personal struggles. Her breakthrough came when she was still a teenager, cast as Darlene Conner on the sitcom Roseanne. At a time when most young female characters on television were written to be bubbly, sweet, and harmless, Darlene was something entirely different. She was sharp, sarcastic, emotionally complex, and unapologetically real. Sarah infused the role with a depth that felt far beyond her age. Audiences didn't just laugh at Darlene, they recognized her. For many viewers, she became a mirror of adolescent frustration, intelligence, and emotional isolation. What most people did not realize was that Sarah herself was experiencing many of the same emotions she portrayed on screen. The line between character and reality was thinner than anyone knew. As Roseanne became one of the most influential sitcoms in American television history, Sara Gilbert grew up in front of millions. Fame arrived early, but privacy disappeared just as fast. While other child actors struggled publicly, Sarah internalized her battles. She remained academically driven, eventually attending Yale University while still working in television. This balance between intellect and performance set her apart, but it also added pressure. She was constantly proving that she was more than just a sitcom kid, more than a sarcastic character, more than a product of her environment. The expectations placed on her were enormous, and she carried them silently. Behind the scenes, the set of Roseanne was not always a safe or comfortable space. The show was groundbreaking, but it was also chaotic. Tensions, power struggles, and emotional volatility were part of the daily atmosphere. For a young actor still forming her identity, this environment left marks that would take years to understand. Sarah later acknowledged that the intensity of the show affected her deeply, shaping how she viewed authority, conflict, and emotional expression. Yet, at the time, she kept moving forward because stopping was never presented as an option. After Roseanne ended, many expected Sara Gilbert to fade into the background, another former child star unable to transition into adulthood. Instead, she made a deliberate choice to step away from constant visibility. She took on selective roles, explored writing and producing, and focused on understanding herself outside of public expectation. This period of her life was quiet but crucial. It was during these years that Sarah began confronting questions she had long avoided about identity, fulfillment, and the emotional cost of always being strong. Her return to mainstream television came not as an actress first, but as a creator. Sarah became one of the original minds behind The Talk, a daytime talk show that aimed to center women's voices in honest, unfiltered conversation. This move revealed another side of her talent. She was no longer just performing scripts written by others. She was shaping narratives, guiding discussions, and influencing culture from behind the scenes. The Talk became a success, and Sarah earned respect as a serious industry force. Yet even then, something felt restrained. She was present, influential, admired, but emotionally guarded. When Roseanne was revived decades later, Sarah returned to the role that had defined her youth. Darlene Conner was older now, worn down by life, carrying regrets and unresolved pain. The character's evolution felt eerily aligned with Sarah's own journey. When the show transformed into The Conners, following controversy and upheaval, Sara became its emotional anchor. She took on increased creative responsibility, helping steer the series through loss, change, and reinvention. To the audience, this looked like strength. To those who paid closer attention, it looked like survival. By the time Sara Gilbert reached her late 40s, her life appeared stable from the outside. She had professional respect, a lasting legacy, and a reputation for intelligence and integrity. But stability is not the same as peace. Years of emotional restraint, public scrutiny, and personal sacrifice had accumulated quietly. Those closest to her noticed a shift, subtle but undeniable, a heaviness behind the eyes, a careful distance in interviews, a woman who had mastered resilience, but at a cost that was no longer invisible. At 50 years old, Sara Gilbert stands as a symbol of endurance in an industry that rarely allows it. Yet her tragedy is not defined by scandal or collapse. It is defined by something far more haunting, the weight of a life spent being strong when vulnerability was never encouraged. The pain that shadows her today did not arrive suddenly. It was built slowly, layer by layer, through years of responsibility, silence, and self-denial. As Sara Gilbert moved deeper into adulthood, the world continued to see a woman in control, measured, thoughtful, composed. But control can sometimes be a survival mechanism rather than a sign of peace. Away from the cameras, Sara was navigating layers of identity that fame never allows time to explore freely. Growing up in the public eye meant that her mistakes, uncertainties, and emotional growing pains were never truly private. While many people discover who they are quietly, Sara did so under the invisible pressure of expectation. Every choice carried weight, and every silence was interpreted. One of the most significant aspects of Sara Gilbert's life that quietly shaped her emotional landscape was her journey with identity and relationships. She came out publicly as a lesbian in 2010, a moment that was received with respect but also scrutiny. What many failed to understand was that this was not a sudden revelation, but the result of years of internal conflict. Sara later admitted that she had struggled deeply with understanding her own feelings during her younger years, especially while in long-term relationships with men. That confusion did not come from dishonesty, but from pressure to fit in, to appear stable, and to maintain a version of herself that felt acceptable to the world watching. Her long-term relationship with producer Allison Adler brought moments of happiness and grounding, and together they had 2 children. Motherhood became one of the most defining roles in Sara's life. Friends and colleagues often described her as deeply devoted, thoughtful, and protective as a parent. Yet motherhood also intensified the emotional stakes of everything else. Balancing a demanding career, public visibility, and personal truth while raising children created a level of internal strain that rarely shows on the surface. Sara carried responsibility quietly, rarely asking for sympathy or relief. After her relationship with Adler ended, Sara later married musician Linda Perry. At the time, the relationship seemed like a fresh chapter, 2 creative women building a life together. They welcomed a son, and for a brief period, there was a sense of renewal. But even this chapter did not escape difficulty. The marriage eventually ended in separation, followed by a prolonged and emotionally taxing divorce process. For someone as private as Sara Gilbert, having personal pain intersect with legal proceedings and media attention was deeply unsettling. The end of the marriage was not loud or dramatic, but it was heavy, slow, and exhausting. What made this period especially difficult was that Sara was still expected to function at a high level professionally. She was producing, acting, and carrying the emotional tone of The Conners, a show built around grief, family fracture, and survival. In many ways, her real life and her fictional work began to echo each other. She portrayed characters processing loss while doing the same off-camera.
That emotional overlap blurred boundaries and deepened fatigue. The audience saw realism. Sara lived it. As time went on, viewers began to notice changes. Sara appeared less frequently in interviews. Her presence on The Talk diminished before she eventually stepped away. When she did speak publicly, her tone was reflective, careful, almost guarded. She spoke about growth, gratitude, and balance, but rarely about joy. There was a sense that she was conserving energy, choosing silence where she once engaged freely. This was not withdrawal out of bitterness, but self-preservation. One of the hardest truths about long-term success is that it can trap a person in roles they no longer recognize themselves in. Sara Gilbert had spent decades being the strong one, the intelligent one, the stable one. There was little room for her to fall apart publicly, even when she needed to. Emotional exhaustion does not always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it appears as distance, sometimes as stillness, sometimes as a quiet reshaping of priorities that others misinterpret as disappearance. At 50, Sara Gilbert is not facing tragedy in the traditional sense. There's no scandal, no downfall, no single moment that explains the heartbreak people feel when they see her now. The tragedy lies in accumulation, in the years of holding space for others while minimizing her own needs, in the strength that became a burden, and in the realization that resilience, when overused, can slowly erode joy. Those close to Sara describe her as thoughtful, principled, and deeply empathetic. But empathy, when constantly extended outward, can leave little room inward. Her life reflects the cost of emotional labor, especially for women in public roles who are praised for endurance but rarely protected from burnout. Sara's story challenges the idea that success equals fulfillment. It reveals a quieter truth, that some of the strongest people carry the heaviest unseen weight. And yet, this is not a story without dignity. There is power in choosing privacy. There is courage in stepping back. Sara Gilbert's tragedy is not that she suffered, but that she had to learn how to exist beyond the expectations that defined her for so long. What remains now is a woman reassessing what peace truly means and whether she is finally allowed to claim it.